So in a shamanic tradition, rather than putting our faith and our belief in someone else's experience, we put our faith and our belief in our own direct experience. So there I was in the Orkney Islands of Scotland, directly experiencing something extraterrestrial.
Because once they perfected the species and the creature, then they had the DNA material. Once they had the DNA material, they could then go to the next phase and go into and create the cloning chambers, which you know a lot about. John Paul and I have walked a very exciting and inspiring path together, doing many journeys together, and having many interesting experiences. And specifically because of his background as a shaman and a sight whisperer and a knowledge keeper of ancient knowledge and human history from a very different perspective than just mainstream archaeology or exploration or research or geology. And that's really why I wanted to start the series of chats with John Paul, to get into the more spiritual side of things, the shamanic side of things, because I have met many shamans in my travels around the world. And I've had some great deep connections with shamans and acquired great insight and knowledge and understanding from a lot of shamans around the world, whether it's North America, Canada, USA, Europe, and also South America, Brazil, and other South American countries, Mexican, and also in the East, and Australia, I guess, as well, yes. And John Paul is in Australia, but I must say that I have not come across a shaman with such a diverse set of skills, insights, and knowledge that John Paul has. And I guess for that reason, we've become good friends, and we've shared, and I trust we'll continue sharing some very exciting journeys of discovery together. So, John Paul, thank you for talking to me and agreeing to share your great knowledge and insight. For those that don't know, John Paul was also the shaman at the Ubuntu Festival that we held in South Africa in 2018. In fact, the opening ceremony at the Ubuntu Festival, which will forever remain one of the great moments of my life.
Well, thank you. Now, it's been a wild journey that the two of us have been on. It's been absolutely extraordinary. I think I often laugh at when people say, well, how did you and Michael meet? And I have to tell the story of being, guided by the universe. And the most favorite part of the story was once I found out about you, then I saw that you were doing this tour, but I was teaching at the National Circus School at the time. And I thought, well, there's no way I can go. And then I got an email from the school saying, we've really screwed up the calendar. We're really sorry, but we're going to have to take a hiatus for all the academic courses while the students are in production. So we're going to have to ask you to pause for these 5 weeks. And it was exactly the same weeks as the tour. So I thought, all right, that's the universe saying you two need to meet each other.
Exactly.
Yep.
So I think what I'd like to do, John Paul, is start our discussion with you arriving in South Africa, arriving here at our place, Stone Circle Lodge and Museum, where we do all the tours and research to the stone circles and the ancient ruins. Obviously, not just in the province of Mpumalanga or in our immediate environment, but pretty much all over Southern Africa, into Botswana, Swaziland, Zimbabwe, and so forth. And you've traveled to many of those places with us, to Tsodilo Hills. I mean, what an incredible journey that was, at the Serpent Cave, and then Great Zimbabwe, and Swaziland, the ancient mine there, and so many more amazing places we've covered here. When you first came to South Africa, you came, what did you know about what you were coming to?
I knew absolutely nothing. So there's a bit of an interesting backstory. So my tradition and all of my training is Native American, so Native Canadian. And in that training, you just look down, you look at the earth, and you develop relationships with the plants and the animals and the rivers and the rocks. And you look down. You don't look up to the stars. It's not about aliens. It's not about extraterrestrials. It's not about other planets. the stars are important, but because they tell you what's going to happen on the earth. And it's looking at the stars and the movement of the constellations to understand what's happening to us on the earth. So it's a very earth-based shamanic tradition. And when I was in the Orkney Islands of Scotland, I had my first experience, and this would have been easily 20, 25 years into my life as a shaman. And I go into this ruin as a sight whisperer in the Orkneys, and I see this kind of blue gaseous shape that's talking to the students. And I don't know what kind of to make of that. And that was my first encounter with something from another dimension, not of this earth. And I had to really grapple with accepting that that was what was real. So in a shamanic tradition, rather than putting our faith and our belief in someone else's experience, we put our faith and our belief in our own direct experience. So there I was in the Orkney Islands of Scotland, directly experiencing something extraterrestrial. And I had to accept that. So in part of this conversation with this blue gaseous entity who said, look, I can take another form if that's going to make it easier for you, I said, well, who are you? And they said, well, you would understand a little bit of us from your knowledge of ancient Mesopotamia and Sumeria. Okay, sure. In Western Civ class somewhere, we discovered the Fertile Crescent and the beginnings of civilization. So that started this kind of interesting journey of ancient Sumerian Mesopotamia. So I knew that when I started finding you, that there was something about ancient Mesopotamia and Sumeria, and that's some connection to South Africa. That's about all I knew. And
wow,
trusting.
That alone is quite a leap for most people. You know, you're going to South Africa to find a connection with Sumerians in Mesopotamia. What's going on here?
Yeah. But I really trust, I've worked with guides for so many years, and there's different kinds of teachers and guides that have been part of steering me in the right direction for all of my life. So at the point that they go ancient Mesopotamia, and I start Googling ancient Mesopotamia, and Michael Tellinger shows up, and I get a really good vibe from what you're saying, and I go, ooh, there's integrity with this guy. What he's saying and what he's talking about is not full of ego. He's not pushing a particular agenda. He's just investigating with an open heart and an open mind. And I was like, cool. And then coincidence. You only need a couple of coincidences in this world to go, yep, that's where I need to be. So that was the arrival. And then I think it was fairly quickly on the tour that we went to Adam's calendar, I think. Because we went on safari, I remember, kind of, to get the.
I can't remember the sequence of events on that first tour that you and I met. I can't remember the sequence of events, but in any case, at some stage we ended up at Adam's calendar. Is that where you had the first, I guess, real connection with what we were doing here? We were about to embark on, which is really huge.
Yep. So one of the things that has been fun is that I didn't do a bunch of, I didn't know who Zachariah Stitchin was. I didn't know, I couldn't spell Anunnaki, never, I think I had heard you say the name, but it was like the Anu something. So, and I don't.
That's important for a lot of people to understand, that, people that are watching this, to know that you had an open slate when we first met. I knew nothing about you. Only later that I realized, what an incredible, deep human you are, and how much knowledge you have, and the talents that you have that have been bestowed upon you. And so when you came here, you didn't come with a preconceived idea, because I must admit that a lot of people that do come here, not all of them, but a lot, have either read my books or they read Zachariah Sitchin and they find me. So they are aware of the Anunnaki. So they come here with a preconceived idea to come and find the Anunnaki connections in Southern Africa, which they you can vouch for it now, and we'll go through that. But so it's great to get someone that doesn't know about me, doesn't know about the Anunnaki, and finds that connection themselves, because that's corroborative evidence of what I've been sharing for more than 12 years now. Yeah. And that I find really exciting. And I must admit that I've had many channelers, shamans, spiritual people, healers, psychics, whatever, that have come to these structures and these ruins and Adam's calendar and many other places that we go to, and had without knowing anything about me, and had the same downloads and information. But you have provided by far, not even in the same ballpark, the most detailed and inquisitive information and detailed information that we've ever heard. And that's what we want to unpack in these discussions we're having.
Sure. Well,
tell us about your first journey to Adam's calendar, or what you were leading up to before I rudely interrupted you. Before I unleash you, because it's like, because I can unleash you and you can talk for a week without me interrupting. I know that. But what I'd like to just also mention is that the thing about John Paul, for those of you that don't know him, is, first of all, your shamanic name is EagleHeart. That's your shamanic name. He was trained in the North American shamanic traditions. One of the, which tradition was that?
The Shuswap.
The Shuswap. And that was 30 years ago? How long ago was that?
1987.
1987. So it's more than 30 years ago. Yeah. So, and John Paul is by far the most multifaceted, multidimensional, and most talented and open-minded shamans that I've ever met. And I guess that's why we get on, and that's why we can have these conversations, because there are a lot of brilliant shamans and brilliant minds and very deeply spiritual, deeply connected people, but often because of their circumstances, wherever they live or the conditions that they live in, their shamanic journeys are often focused in certain directions. But John Paul's shamanic experience and knowledge encompasses pretty much everything and anything. Not only that, which we didn't really bring up, is that you're also a site whisperer. You can speak to the ancestors and the spirits of the sites, and that's actually one of your fortes, one of your strong points, which has given us so much of this knowledge and information. In fact, probably the number one aspect of your shamanic gifts is that you can connect to the guides, the guardians, and the spirits of these ancient sites. And that's, throw it back at you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So that's the thing that I love doing the most in all of the shamanic work. I think the one-on-one work as a shaman, spirit work, soul retrievals, healing work, sound healing, it's lovely. But the thing that I enjoy the most is the site whispering, because I learn so much. And I think that what I've learned over the years is the name EagleHeart is because there's room in my heart for anything. I think I can find a place in my heart to understand, accept, listen, honor, and that doesn't matter. So there we are in this van moving up the hill toward Adam's calendar. And typically for me, site whispering, my feet are on the ground and I tune in. So I consciously tune in, introduce myself, seek permission, state my intention, and then it sort of unfolds. Well, there we are in the van trundling along, and suddenly I look out the window and there's a procession of people walking along, probably about 100 people walking alongside the van.
I remember now I just suddenly remember as we were driving up there, I remember you sharing that with me, and it was like, oh my God, they're here. What Greater Mutwa told me about this site is true. You just picked it up. And at that stage, you didn't know about the Greater Mutwa story, right?
No.
You see, that's beautiful corroboration and shamanic and spiritual corroboration of a different story from Greater Mutwa, a great shaman himself, and what he told me about the ancient site, about these ceremonies being held there for thousands of years. And here we go. You didn't know about that. And next thing you see, this procession of ancient people. Carry on. I just love this. I love this.
Yeah. So I was completely taken, because that doesn't typically happen for me. As I say, it's typically stating a clear intention, feet on the ground. So to be in a vehicle and see this parade happening alongside us I was like, okay, where are we? So you had explained a little bit about, the birth of man and why it's Adam's calendar. And so I was a bit prepared, but nothing like that there would be this ancient people's procession. So I think the next thing that I really remember of that experience at Adam's calendar was you taking us over to a little area, and you said that women often are attracted to this area. That there's something about birth, there's something about gestation, there's something about pregnancy that a lot of females find this area interesting. And I'm sitting there listening to you. And again, on this side, there's this incredibly tall figure standing there, like incredibly tall, like 8 foot high, 9 foot, something really high, tall person standing there and just standing. And I remember saying to you, there's a really tall character right here who might want to share something. And you said,
I remember now.
What?
Yeah.
And then he introduced himself as a part of the genetic, he was a fertility like a fertility midwife, I think was what he described his position as. And he proceeded to explain exactly how the impregnation went, how the genetic engineering worked, how delicate the operation was, and that this particular place was powerful because of the magnetic properties of this place. And then you said, well, there's all hematite. This is all just hematite in here, this whole foundation. So it was kind of this fun thing of going backwards and forwards between what he was saying, which would trigger something to you, go, oh, well, yes. And then he would say something and you'd say, well, yes, and that was kind of this beginning of, but it's partially, I think, that there's a part of me that is just fascinated. And I listen to this and think, okay, sure. I mean, I don't come in, as you say, with some kind, I don't come in to prove anything. I come in to listen. And I'm just,
and that's awesome. And I want to, through these chats that we have, I want you to share with us all the things that you've discovered. I know you've written down pages and pages and pages of information. Hopefully we can go through as much of that as we can without getting boring or repetitive. But it's interesting that you bring up the hematite, because there's just hematite all over that top of Adam's calendar. I've picked up many little pieces of it. But what I find fascinating is there's a form of hematite called botryoidal hematite. It's like this bubbly hematite that turns silvery. The surface of it turns like silver. It's literally like you've taken shiny silver paint, or it almost looks like mercury, like solid mercury. It's that silver. And you've painted this bubbly hematite with this silvery thick paint. And it's called botryoidal hematite. And it is at that place, I don't know if you remember this, where this birthing took place, that you have this Anunnaki figure share that information with you. It is in that place that we found a piece of botryoidal hematite about that big. That just blew my mind. You don't just find botryoidal hematite lying around. They mine it. It's very, very valuable and very precious. And they go to great lengths and costs to find and mine botryoidal hematite. And there is a piece just lying there in that area that this birthing and fertilization process of the Anunnaki and the creation of this new species apparently took place. So that is not a coincidence. That is a very specific, something happened there, and I don't know yet why and how it's there. But what it does tell me is that the entire Adam's calendar site, or Inzalo Yelanga, as Creator Mutwa called it, is a very powerful, energetic site. It creates huge amounts of energy, electromagnetic fields, sound frequencies, and so forth. And possibly that has something to do with actually converting the hematite to this other form of botryoidal hematite. That's just what's going through my mind. I don't know what the exact process is, and that needs to be investigated. That's one of the things we'll be investigating with the new Antiquities Research Institute, by the way, and we'll come back to that.
Yes, I mean, what are those magnetic properties? What does that do to the human body? Because what they explained on that day, this what's that? What's the word IVF? What's it called when you pay the money to try to get pregnant?
In vitro fertilization.
IVF. Yeah. So he was like running the IVF clinic, was kind of the joke that we had about
right.
He was the
And that's, it's really important that you say that. We think we're an advanced species. We think we have the advanced modern technology and medicine and all that, and we call it IVF, and we think it's really advanced. Well, ancient advanced civilizations would have known about IVF, and they would have used it themselves. So they would have used it long before us, and especially if they had knowledge of genetic and DNA manipulation and cloning, they would have been doing it thousands, if not hundreds of millions of years before us. We just rediscovered it. So this is not something that we should be surprised by. It's just something that happens.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been in the last 5 years, I've been trying to listen to people who do new translations of the ancient Sumerian cuneiform stories, because scholars are reinterpreting it, they're retranslating stuff. And I just heard one today that was looking back at, and you'll know all these terms better than me, the creation story that is
yes,
the
Sumerian creation story. Yes, yeah. Yes, the Enuma Elish.
Thank you, that one. And so it was today, I was just listening to a new scholar that's had a go at this. And I was just going, oh my God, that is exactly what they told me that day 5 years ago. It
was Adam's calendar.
So the new translations of the Sumerian stuff is saying that the Anunnaki they're saying somewhere between, it's either 8 women, 7 women, 14 women, the number changes, but they were impregnated to carry the seeds of this new creature. Yeah. And that's what he was saying, was that it was a very delicate situation. And what they were doing is trying to combine the Neanderthal semen with the Anunnaki female to create this hybrid worker. I think the other thing that's interesting is that in all the work that I've done and listening to the Anunnaki over all these years, they never refer to us as the humans. They always call us the creature.
Yes.
I always say the creature was, and in my brain, I'm saying, wonder why they ever use that word. Well, today I heard, again, in this translation, that they referred to the offspring of this fertilization technique as the creature that was created, and that the word translates to the creature.
And that's exactly what Anton Parks calls it in his books as well, in his research and his translations. And Anton Parks also, Adamu is the creature. That means, according to his research. And for those people that don't know Anton Parks, it's really important to discover him. He's a French researcher, translator of the Sumerian texts, in my opinion, the best by far, the best that's ever been in our presence, or around or alive. He has a deep understanding of the Sumerian language and the Sumerian texts than anyone else come across in all my personal research. And the good thing is that he's still young. I think in his mid to late 40s, Anton Parks. Yeah. And he translates the Sumerian language in ways that very few people are capable of. And his very clear, repetitive information is that the Adamu is the beast or the creature or the animal that was created for whatever purposes that the Anunnaki needed.
Yep.
So John, I want to come back to your impressions of the procession. So we went to Adam's calendar, and I know we just you brought this up. So obviously Adam's calendar is a really important site, and for those people that don't know, Adam's calendar at this stage remains the oldest working megalithic sun calendar on Earth. And it is highly important for many, many reasons. One of them is that it was most likely the place where humanity was actually created, where that cloning, fertilization, insemination process took place that the Anunnaki worked towards for a long time to create this new creature to be their slaves, that they could utilize and manipulate whichever they wanted on Earth for their activities, whatever they were doing. Mostly mining, I guess, but also servants and slaves for other reasons, not just mining, for pretty much everything else.
Yep. Well, it was an understanding that there was a whole genetic project, that this guy was kind of just the nurse attending the insemination, but that there was an incredible genetic team that he was part of. And, he would reference the work that other people were doing. And that I think what we understood was that once they got it to take, which was a lot of trial and error, but once they got it to take, and that these 8 women gave birth to the creature, and it was successful, then they could go and do things off on their own. They didn't need Adam's calendar per se anymore. But there was something about the magnetic properties at that corner of Adam's calendar that made it possible for this to work. So I don't know how many times they tried it in other places.
Right. What I do know from my personal research is, and many channelings with various channelers and shamans, the one common denominator that keeps coming back is, and I think somewhere, I speak under correction, but I think somewhere in Anton Parks's works, he refers to the same timeline period as well, that while the Anunnaki were trying to clone and create this new creature, it took them about 5,000 years to perfect this creature, this being. They did many different genetic tries, blending different animals and species and creatures, and it was just an abomination. It just didn't work. It didn't happen. It wasn't an easy process. So when they eventually got it right, it was a huge celebratory moment for them and relief, because now they could have this slave creature that they were desperately in need of to help them with their chores and tasks here on Earth. And that's really important. It didn't happen. Oh, they didn't just throw a bunch of DNA together, a bunch of genetic engineers, and there we go, there's a being. No, it took thousands of years, around 5,000 years. That's the information that I have. Because then they would create beings and humanoids that either their heads were too big, or their lungs were too small, or their hearts would explode, or they're just so many different trial versions of this creature went over and over and over again. And as we know, pregnancy and the growth of a baby in a species doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. So every time you want to try this new species and creature, you have to wait for it to grow and evolve, to grow into its full body to see whether this thing works or not. Or eventually, from my understanding, once they perfected it, then we get to the cloning chambers, right? So we can talk about that, because once they perfected the species and the creature, then they had the DNA material. Once they had the DNA material, they could then go to the next phase and go into and create the cloning chambers, which you know a lot about, where they were just cloning these creatures into adulthood. They would actually come out of these big amniotic sacs, like we've seen sci-fi movies, as fully grown adult creatures or humans or Adamus. And do you want to add to that, John Paul?
Yeah. So that's what they've said to me, is that they were able to clone, and that eventually the cloning wasn't as successful as allowing the creature to fertilize itself and to impregnate itself. They said that the cloning, they were delicate creatures. Their lifespan wasn't particularly long. So there were all kinds of difficulties. But again, they spent probably another couple of thousands of years perfecting the creature. I remember at one point they explained to me that one of the most difficult things they did was to sort out the eye, because the eye had to be able to work in the mines underground in no light or low light, and also then work above ground. So the fact that our pupil can dilate and deal with different kinds of light was a major improvement that they manufactured. Yes. They figured out how to do that for our eyes. Again, I just sit there and listen to these stories that they tell me and think, wow, okay, I guess.
Yeah. And this is what I find so interesting, when we talk about these IT geeks and these computer geeks and these techno geeks that want to make AI, artificial intelligence, that is like human. It's just, that's when I realize how little these scientists or these engineers and techno engineers, how little they know about the miracle of creation, the miracle of what it takes to create a single cell organism, and a single biological cell, whether it's animal or plant, and the difference between those cells. Anyone who's a molecular biologist or a biologist or a geneticist will understand the complexity of it. This is not something that you can just create and throw together and use AI to do that. This is because behind it is the consciousness and the purpose and the drive to actually make this happen. And that's when you find the spirit or the source code that we just don't understand. We can comprehend it when we open our minds to realize that there's a greater source code for everything that we can't understand. We just know it's there. Call it God, call it the great spirit in the sky, call it the primordial source code of creation. And that is where modern scientists and the IT geeks trying to create AI, they just really miss the boat. They have no comprehension of the incredible complexity, the miracle of life, the miracle of conscious life itself. And just I want to come back to the cloning chambers. So the story is that we're now dealing with the Anunnaki. We just sort of jumped straight into it. And I know a lot of people are excited, a lot of people, newcomers that have just discovered the Anunnaki. So this is obviously a very old story, age-old story. It's been researched already since I think some of the earliest translations of the Sumerian texts that talk about the Anunnaki more like 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago already. So this is not a new story, but it's taken a long time until Zecharia Sitchin really turned it into a popular subject with all his books. Now, whether Sitchin was correct or whether he was wrong on most of the stuff doesn't really matter. Even if only 10% of what he told us is accurate and true, that's okay. We can work with 10% and grow and evolve and expand on that. Maybe most of his interpretations were incorrect. For me, that doesn't matter. No. So I know that there's this movement of people trying to prove Zecharia Sitchin was wrong and etc. So what? The guy dedicated his life to this. He's the guy that really opened the door to the Sumerian translations, to the Anunnaki, the cloning, and the fact that our mythology is actually our history.
Yeah.
There's no one more than Zecharia Sitchin that showed us that that is actually the case, that what we read in our history books is a very far removed from what the true and real history of the world is, and what we read in the Sumerian text is much closer to the true history of the world and humankind than any history book can share with us.
What I often say to people is, I think it's extraordinary arrogance on the Western mind to say, okay, we've got thousands and thousands of these Sumerian tablets. These were people who recorded everything. They recorded the amount of tax. They recorded the amount of wheat. They recorded the number of sheep. They recorded everything. Historical accuracy was their thing. And how arrogant of us to say, well, they did all this historical recording and then they created this fanciful mythology. That's incredibly arrogant, as opposed to saying, wow, if these people were dedicated to historical accuracy and recording, and there's the other things, maybe they're actually recording this. Maybe this is actually what happened, not some fanciful mythology that they just spontaneously created. That's always been an extraordinary.
I often refer to it in my early days of lecturing on this 10 years ago already, or even further back in time. I used to say that. So I can't imagine in a time when writing and reading was really an exclusive thing. People couldn't write and read. Just think about it. Yeah. Writing and reading, even as far back as 200 years ago, there was only for those that had the opportunity to go to school or be educated and be taught to read and write. So we just assume that everybody can read and write. Well, throughout history, that is not the case. And here we go back thousands of years where the art of writing and reading was really reserved for the elite, the royal scribes, those closely associated with the royal families and those first early priest kings. So I can't, it's a ludicrous, insane idea that the people that created reading and writing and were controlling it, and as you said, write down everything. They would record the crops, how many tons of crops, or how many hives or shives or whatever you call them of wheat and maize and corn and whatever they were collecting, and how many sheep they had, and how many moons came past, and how many stars rose in what sky where, and medicine and cooking and making wine and beer. They recorded everything and recorded music, the first musical notes, musical notification and recording music, how to play and read music was we find in the Sumerian text. So anyone that thinks that these guys that were writing this, the scribes, were doing it because they had nothing better to do, right?
Yeah.
And they were just doing it to fool and confuse future generations. This was what they did. So we need to look at that as actual historic records of what was going on.
Yeah.
Now, while I say that, I do believe that there might be a lot of deception written into those texts, because remember, they were the kings, they were the ruling class. So they would always record what is going on from their perspective as the ruling class, not from the perspective of the working class or the slaves, who had very different ambitions or hopes and prayers for their future. So always keep in mind that what we're reading is from the perspective of the ruling class. They were recording the history from their perspective. They were the victors, the conquerors, and they were writing the history. And if we keep that in mind, we can then start to read between the lines how those early people were oppressed, manipulated, and controlled by that ruling class, the same way that the ruling class controls the world today. That is a spectacular parallel comparison, because the same is going on today. Just the fake news, read the papers and the history books, how they write down what's going on, but they're omitting the actual truth, the reasons and the conditions and the causes of what's going on are not part of that narrative. And this is really important. But I'm going to throw it back at you. So I want to, if we can go back to Adam's calendar, if you want to add anything else there.
Well, there was a lot there. I mean, one of the things there is the stones that are aligned to the constellation of Orion. And I remember we were standing there looking at that stone and looking out at the three pyramids. That's another topic. And I said to one of the guides that was there, that it wasn't the same IVF guy, and saying, why Orion? So again, keep in mind, this is very early in my understanding that in the shamanic world, I have to deal with aliens. I have to deal with extraterrestrials. I have to accept that that's part of our story, and I have to deal with this. So I'm early to go, okay, Orion, what about Orion? Why this place in Orion? And this guide said, well, that's so that the people that would be here thousands and thousands of years later, who would use this site as a ceremonial place, would know where we came from. And when that aligns, when that constellation rises over the edge, when it lines up, they would feel the connection to us. And that we built this so that they would have that feeling of connection to us. And they would know that someday we will come back. And that if they want to reach out to us, when they feel the vibration of the frequency of that constellation, it will resonate to these stones, to this place, and they'll feel okay. So it was kind of a beautiful thing of saying, we've tried to leave some message, some embrace to the creatures, because we knew that tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of years later, this site will still be powerful and people will want to connect with the builders.
Now, John Paul, you feel energies. I mean, that's part of what you do automatically. Can you describe to us any specific emotions or feelings that you had, energetic absorption of what you felt energetically at Adam's calendar, or as you approach it, once you're inside it, the difference, or anything that you'd like to share regarding that?
Well, there's definitely a boundary. There's an outer boundary. So for those of you who don't know, it's on the edge of a cliff. So you can't approach it from the cliff face because you'd have to fly there. But you approach it from the land side. And when you come up, there's a definite feeling of a boundary. You absolutely know when you cross that boundary. Suddenly the hairs stand up, something's magnetic, you feel quickening is what I would describe it. There's energy. You feel, oh, wow, pay attention, look up. So there's something that alerts you If you've been complacent, you just can't. Once you're across that line, it's just a lot of energy. So you notice something, and everyone that crosses that line, well, you've led hundreds of people, and it must be fun for you to watch them step over that line and see them light up.
Yeah. One of my favorite things to do is, as you know, we've done it many times. When we first discovered that the place is highly energetic, one of the first things, before we actually measured the frequencies and the electromagnetic fields, one of the first things that, so I can't even remember, it was very, very early in me starting to take people and tourists, mostly in those days were mostly spiritual people and spiritual tourists, spiritual tourism, and people that were interested in Anunnaki and so forth, taking them to Adam's calendar, and somebody brought their GPS in there and they went, wow, I just lost my GPS signal inside Adam's calendar in the circular kind of structure.
Yep.
It's stone wall. It's not, it's not a circular wall, but you can clearly see from the aerial photographs that it used to be originally a circular structure that similar to Stonehenge, with these standing stones everywhere, smaller than Stonehenge, but very powerful because of what they do, the electromagnetic fields and the toroidal fields that they create. We'll get into that much later. But the first time they brought in this GPS and said, oh my God, I've lost my GPS. Oh no, it's come back. It's come back. Oh, it's gone. Oh, it's come back. And so I went, wow, that's amazing. So we checked that out, and then I brought my own GPS in there, and I went, oh my God, yes. So what happens is that something is going on there that keeps interrupting the signal to your GPS satellite. And that clearly says it's a powerful field, because that doesn't happen outside. Yes, you lose signal every now and then, but that's just glitches and whatever, not glitches, but going on. But in Adam's calendar, it's very obvious and the moment you step across that boundary that you described, that energetic boundary where you can feel your hair stand up, and we know exactly where that boundary is because we've measured it many, many times.
Yep.
And as you go in there with your GPS, it's gone, and it keeps connecting and losing connection and reconnecting. And during that period of reconnection, it comes back and it shows you north is over there. Then it comes back and it says, oh, now north is over there. And it comes back and now it's moved over there. So it keeps changing. And then you realize, okay, this is a moving magnetic field. The energy field, or this vortex that we're inside, is living. It's alive. It's moving. And this is why it keeps moving the north on your compass or on your GPS around. And that is really important. It took me many years to realize how important that is. And so that's why what we know today about Adam's calendar and the powerful machine that it was must have been just unimaginable to us today. This giant vortex toroidal field machine that was constructed there, that boggles the mind. What we now know, and what I suspect, what we know from shamanic, again, teachings and downloads and channelings, is that it was used as a teleportation device.
Sure. Well, you feel that unlike other sites, I've been to sites all over the world, who feel very grounded. They're connected. This is the place. When you're at Adam's calendar, you feel like you're on a kind of tilting saucer. Is the best thing I can explain. That it's kind of this thing that's delicately balanced, but in motion. You don't feel that you've grounded to the earth. You don't feel that sense of grounding that you feel if you're at Stonehenge or at some of the other sites that you've got. You definitely don't feel that. So it feels as though underneath Adam's calendar there is something else. And, there have been people who have said there's a crystal cave. I don't know, but definitely you get a feeling that there's a thin layer of earth, and then there's something else there that this is sitting on, that is generating this energy, and that the energy hits these stones, and the stones are, thank God, what's kind of anchoring this thing so it doesn't just fly off.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to be discussed about what is beneath Adam's calendar. Today we have new information that has reached me. It's a few years ago now, but very little exploration has been done because it's very difficult, as you know. I mean, you can't go over the edge there. There's lots of bushes and trees. So to go and explore that is a very difficult and dangerous thing to do, because, you'll die. You fall 200 meters, 300 meters down into the valley, and that's it. And there's no one that can fetch you, because to get down there, you can't get down there. So you have to go all the way around down to Barberton and then drive all the way back through farmlands and dirt roads and forestry to get back to that cliff edge where you might have fallen. And what we do know from oral reports from people that have been down there or looked over and gone down there is that there are many bones, remains of beings at the edge of that cliff.
Wow.
I suspect that some of it has been covered by soil and sand and so forth, but I've had more than one person that tell me they don't know if it's animal remains or human remains at the bottom of the edge where Adam's calendar sits on. Now, that's really interesting because we know that there's been sacrifice and you know, like the Mayas, when they fell, the Mayan civilization used to just sacrifice thousands of people and throw them over the edge. And even in Zulu tradition, African tribal tradition, where they would kill people and sacrifice them by throwing them over the edge of a cliff. And not just here, but all over the world. So I also had some shamanic downloads or channelings where they tell me that there was a period long after the fall of Adam's calendar, where it was no longer used by the Anunnaki, when the more recent tribes, whoever came in, that would hold on to that knowledge or that energy or trying to utilize it and abuse the site for their own benefits, how they would perform sacrificial bloodletting and sacrifice blood for Orion. Like, you know, you've got to give blood to Orion. And we know that there's secret societies that still do that today. These dark cults of Marduk and that do bloodletting and child sacrifice and all this. It's just horrific stuff that's going on. And that Adam's calendar was used after it was pretty much abandoned by the Anunnaki for its original purpose, and it was destroyed, that it was used for sacrifice to try and somehow bring the power and the energy back. So I wonder if some of that at the bottom, and if we go and dig at the bottom, which, as you know, is a costly and a difficult exercise, what we will find there. I suspect there's some incredible, deep, ancient, historic evidence lying at the bottom of the edge of Adam's calendar.
Yep. Well, and I recall just on this last time that we were together and flying a drone across the cliff and looking at that cliff face where you can see these plugs. You know, there's the rock, and then suddenly there's this, what looks like an artificial plug right below Adam's calendar. Yes. Two of them. That very clearly, when you look at those images.
Yeah, that's very clear. I want to talk about that as little as possible because that's some serious exploration needs to be done to go and look. Are those real plugs? Did somebody plug up those entrances to this under this cave or whatever is there? That's really important. So I think maybe on this note we can end this first discussion and pick up again tomorrow or whenever, because I think this is a good highlight and a high point to end our first chat.